Wow, hi. It's so great to see all of you. Can you hear me good? Okay, thank you. I'm so happy to be here at the Poetry Society of America, newly arrived in Brooklyn. It's been an organization that has been very important to me throughout my life as a poet, including my very first teacher of poetry as an undergraduate is a former president of this organization, a woman named Judith Johnson. And as soon as I arrived in New York for my MFA at NYU, God help me, because no one else would. Yeah, it was not funny at the time. It's funny now. It's funny now. It wasn't funny then. But this organization under Rebecca Wolf, who was then the program director, I mean, it's like my MFA was in the Poetry Society of America, basically, the writers that came to read and teach. So it's really cool to be here reading for the Poetry Society of America. And it's wonderful to be reading tonight with Nicole Sealey. I wrote to her on Twitter, I said, from Ferguson to Palestine, basically. You know, her book is about Ferguson, and Ferguson is Palestine. The Ferguson PD was trained by the IDF, and the sheriff of the Ferguson PD was in Jerusalem being trained a month before you know, our dear brother was killed in the street. So the occupational and militarized tactics of U.S. police departments, Atlanta PD, Buffalo PD, Boston PD, New York PD, they're all trained. They've all been trained. One of the industries of the state of Israel, which I have intimate connections to and dear beloved people who live there, but one of their industries is training U.S. police departments. So it's a question that we have to ask ourselves. Even if we're believers and supporters of that state, especially perhaps if we are, then you know, what is the path forward? How do we move forward? How do we find peace and harmony? It's a question. And I beg my brothers and sisters who are in solidarity with Palestinians, you cannot say things like from the river to the sea. These were racist terms to get rid of Jewish people, you know? So if you are looking for the future, if you want a real future, if you want to do the hard work of making a future for the people who live in that region, you can't fall back on those old tropes. And there are millions of people who live there. They're not going to vanish overnight. I understand that you may believe that the place is an ethno-nationalist state, but you live in one too. So let's be a little, we need to be a little more nuanced in how we're thinking about the issue and work on behalf of the people who live there, all of the people who live there. So that's all I have to say about that. And also my reading is like a crypto response. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And my reading is probably a crypto response. The first poem I'm going to read is called Thicket. And it is... yeah, anyways, I won't say anything else about it. The story unfolds like this. A blameless father loves the as yet unharmed son. The son is somewhat randy and alarmed at his appearance in an otherwise orthodox world. Does it hurt him that he has been cut from the tribe of sons who believe, are unarmed, who recite all the rules? It's the father who believes in God. The son believes in his father. The father in this story is guileless. He's not trying to call God's bluff. And unbelievably to all, the son willingly opens his throat to the universe. Neither one of them are seeking to see God. They are not saying his name. They are not asking to be saved. This little poem is called, so this book is, it's new and selected poems, which is very strange, because in compiling one's past work, one feels perhaps that one is oneself dead in a fashion, that he ceased to exist, that there's nothing that comes next. So that's a strange little feeling. But I did try to create a trajectory through this book that maybe looked towards the future a little bit. This poem is called Divination. And it is written to my own family. Your son turns restive in his sleep, whispered away by morning to dusk. Verses bloom along his wrists and throat. In bright sentences, his name is cut. 5 times a day he cries out, his voice snuffed in flowery wells. He knows in his heart none can take you truly in save the house that unhomed you. It is a complicated feeling because we create these narratives of home and we each have a different one. So what happens when there are two stories that are at odds with each other? This poem is called Promise Keeper. And Promise Keeper, in the 90s, I don't know if they're still alive anymore. They must be. They've changed. They're mock-up people now. But there was a men's movement called Promise Keepers. But this poem doesn't actually refer to that. It looks at the idea of promised, what is a promised land, I guess, since that's one of the narratives that we have, people who claim a land. And can you share a land that's been claimed? At any rate, I'm mistrustful of that. I ran away from organized religion at the speed of light. And but when one is there in Jerusalem, for example, under the Dome of the Rock, there is indeed a rock. And it's supposedly the place where Adam and Eve, according to the various different stories, in one story it's the place Adam and Eve entered the world after leaving the garden. In another story, it's the place where the Prophet Muhammad launched himself up into heaven. And down inside that rock, it is an enormous rock. It's probably bigger than this room that we're in right now. But there isn't a chamber inside the rock, and that is the place where the Ark of the Covenant was supposed to have set. There's a little ledge there. It's called the Well of the Souls. And I've been there, and I put my hand on that ledge. In the place mountains kept time as they slide into the sea, you made a promise you never kept. You fastened yourself lonely to everything that lived, wanted to open every closed door. You wanted to turn your back on the sky and teach yourself how to fly. Speak in the language of myth and flowers, if you must, but translate it, at least, for the stone and dust. You built a tower to God out of bricks and mud when you should have built it with breath. Wings will not carry you skyward. Your own body is the only mosque you need. That tongue in your mouth is the only rock from which you could ever launch yourself into heaven. Thank you. I've worked in Palestine and in Palestine in the West Bank for many years, back and forth. I never talked about it. I couldn't because of security concerns and because I wanted to continue to go back. So this is something about me you've never heard the story of. I've been interviewed about my work there. I used a pseudonym, so you might have even read the article. But now I'm coming out about it. Seems like this is the time to do it. I was teaching yoga at a place called Farasha Yoga. I was training yoga teachers. I was teaching yoga classes and training yoga teachers. And so that's what I did for probably 7 years, between 2010 and 2016, 6 years at any rate. And one of the dear people that I met there, who is beloved to me, is a poet named Rachel Zvia Back. You may know her work. She published several books here in the States, including with Sheep Meadow Press, her first book. And she's a scholar of Susan Howe, so she's written a critical book on Susan Howe's work. At any rate, I was in the Galilee. She lives there, and we were driving around. We drove around for a day, and this poem is called A Cartography, and it's about that little drive that we took. Sketching the outlines of something or knowing by heart how far one travels. How far did I travel to Haifa or to the sea when I drove with Rachel from the mountains? How do we know how long history will echo? For example, that mosque on the road. We didn't know which war it was destroyed in, or if by mere neglect one side leant dangerously down. Inside, it was covered in graffiti in 4 different languages, the mihrab blackened by fire, no less holy since the primary purpose of a mihrab is to mark direction in an otherwise empty building. One corner of the room was completely exposed to the fields, and across the street there was a dead cow lying on its side. 3 ropes hung down from the minaret where some Hasidic boys had scaled the side and sat on the balcony. What were they doing? Eating sandwiches, saying their prayers, or listening to the language of the land, the abandoned building, or that carcass lying limp on the side of the road? So I was in Haifa, a beautiful city on the Mediterranean shore, and it's also the city where one of the founders of the Baha'i faith is buried. So there's a beautiful garden, a tiered garden leading up the mountain there. And so this is in the voice of when the founder of the Baha'i faith, called the Bab, the Gate, he was called the Gate to God, I guess. When he was being executed in Iran, this boy who was devoted to him climbed up the fence and jumped down there and demanded to be executed alongside the Bab. And so this poem mentions him, refers to him at the end. The boy's name was Anis. Flower gate, edged in petals, I affix myself to the gate at every appointed prayer hour. Seed pods scatter in silver dusk, green cypresses, minaret, the sky. My disobedient body aspires, and I, when music pierces inland, hand in hand, devour this arbor of forgetting, and take one last shot at sharing your fiery fate. In the end, I am not you, I am not a garden or a gate, I am just a scruffy hustler, willing to hop the fence and spend himself bare to nothing. Thank you. Hey, did Nadia get in, by the way? Nadia was trying to get in. Hey, I'm so glad you got in. Thank you. PSA. Parker was like, please stop sending me names of people. It's closed. No more people can get it. I said, book me in a bigger venue next time. All right. This poem is called John. It actually takes place in New York, not in Gaza, but I thought it sort of worked a little bit. John. You guys know where John Street is? Anybody? Okay, yeah, John. I lived on John Street, so when I lived in New York, I lived on John Street. Who was I when I was writing this name? Copper oxidizing to green and air packing itself tight in the seed. The seed unspools in the ground, writing the biography of dirt. And a little down the road, another tower is going up. A man holds his briefcase over his head like an umbrella, and in the rain, bodies are soft and disappear into sound. On John Street, almost choking on loneliness, and the waters of the river are nothing so much as the air around us and ash. What would outlive us drifts sparkling into the October air. When you ask, who am I past this storm-tossed vessel, the one you're always bailing out, it is just another way to ignore this constant unraveling. This always reaching for an end when clearly there is no end in sight. Yeah, John Street. Okay. So I'd like to read this poem. This is the thing that we don't often think about. Like, there are queer people in Palestine. I promise you, I've hung out with them. There are queer people in Gaza right now. There are trans people, and they're on the edge of the edge of the edge, right? I mean, I don't know what to tell you. So this poem is called The Dressmaker of Galilee. And I wrote it about a dressmaker that I saw in Galilee once, stitching a little dress. He wears himself down, wild, uncertain, laps the frayed thread and with his clumsy tongue. He wants to know as well what the body and its coverings could teach him about genders of flesh. The Druze have a secret book. Some know what's in it, and some don't. No one minds. His voice falls to pieces when he claims for himself the spaces of flowers or silk at the worried seam of the border between what is taught and what is felt. Some Druze know we are all about to switch genders. With eyes the same silver as his tailor's needle, in the globe of barbarous heat, he stakes his claim, stitch by stitch. He never learned how to behave. He only knows he must sew one piece to another and spike heaven sense. Yeah, the dressmaker of Galilee. So I want to tell you a little story, not for too long, because I only have a couple minutes left before I turn it over to Ms. Sealey. But this poem is called Ioannis Ritsos. It's not actually about Ioannis Ritsos. Ioannis Ritsos, the great Greek poet, communist Greek poet, was the one when the Palestinian leadership fled Beirut in 1982. During the siege of Beirut, they fled on boats across the Mediterranean and they arrived in Athens. That's where they had asylum. And Ioannis Ritsos, the great Greek poet, whose work I hope you will look up, went down to the harbor to meet Mahmoud Darwish and embraced him, basically. So this poem is called Ioannis Ritsos, and I suppose it is about Ritsos, but it is also about Darwish. And the translator of Lost Homelands, who's mentioned at the end of this poem, is Fadi Judah, who translated Darwish and who's been talking about the Gaza siege right now. He's lost 49 members of his extended family in the siege. Fadi has. Ioannis Ritsos, the epigraph is from Darwish. Athens was welcoming to those who had come from the sea. Ioannis, you held him in the glare of the diamonded sea, unteaching him his practical mantra of liberation. Maybe seeing in him a son to care for you in your loneliness. Loneliness varnished by your detention in the house made of flower stems that thrust through the rocks in the prison yard, its roof made of unscannable lines of rain. You revealed to him the sound of the rusty hinged door, how it would swing sadly open and reveal no homeland beyond at all. He came from the sea, dragging his anklets of keys. Did you teach him then how the old locks and houses of his hometown were already all broken? Ioannis. In the end, he rinsed the last of the coast roads dust from his body after a lifetime of pressing his language into lines of poetry and prayer and precipitation, tired of praising mosques in which he could not pray. The same morning that I was forbidden by the guard to pray at the Mezquita of Cordoba, he woke up in Houston, Texas, and went to a mall food court to meet for the first and last time in his life his translator. The words they spoke to one another were the same as those I saw in stone fragments on the floor of the archaeological dig at Madinat al-Sahra, the ruined capital of the West looking east toward the cities left behind. That city had remained buried for 1,000 years. The palace and throne rooms had been torn apart, and the rubble of the mosaics were now being painstakingly reassembled, piece by piece, unlike the villages of Palestine, disassembled down to stone. Ioannis, what did you say to him that blue afternoon when the stone canoe landed and he arrived in another place that would be home and not home? In Cordoba, meanwhile, the story of his death flashed across the morning news, scrolling across the screen from clay to nothing. But please, let the sea have the last word. The sea he crossed to come to you, or the sea that sparkled off the coast of Chile when he in Neruda's house remembered you, or the sea that rained lightly down as the poet and his translator huddled together over cheap food court coffee to converse in a shopping mall in Texas, though it could have been Athens or Palestine or Neruda's house, at least as good as any mosque in the world, so long as there was coffee and poetry and the sound of rain. Rain in the shape of the river, rain in the shape of a broken lock, rain in the shape of long since written verses, while the translator of Lost Homelands makes from the sound of butterfly wings rain in the shape of the dark furnace of days. And I'll close with this last poem. I moved to California in 2019, and arriving in the West, we know we too live in a settler state. New York City too is occupied land. But when you are removed from history, it is not even that you forget, but in your daily life, it's easy to go about your business, you know? But in the West, I don't know if any of you are from that place or spent time there. It's just a little closer to the present. In a way, it's harder to forget, I suppose. So when I arrived there, I knew I too was a settler in some way in Kumeyaay lands. And I came to learn about Junipero Serra, who was the inquisitor from Spain who went to, and he started in San Diego, really, to Christianize the indigenous people. And I learned two things about California. I learned three things about California. The first thing I learned is that Junipero Serra, the Serras of Mallorca, were crypto-Muslims. I mean, what better place to hide than the priesthood, really? I also learned that the landscape of California is mostly invasive, Mediterranean. It's a Mediterranean environment, and it's mostly invasive. And the last thing I learned, of course, which you may know, that the word California is from an Arab word, Khalifa. It was a Spanish novelist who used that word in one of his novels, and then the explorers decided to call the city that after that name, Khalifa. Now a year like bone on a coast named for the Khalifas. We bring date seeds as tribute to Muslim ghosts, not the ones we harvested, but the ones that haunt our own breath. We bring grass that will spread like Christ. If the spirit will not bend, the body can be made to break. We stitch new texts into the air and ground. What chance to sky? What garden left your tongue shall tie? Don't say mountain haunted by bone. Don't say body. Don't say home. I too chose to live past the arrival of blades into the bodies of my forebears, directing them like rivers or stone, given such vague directions by God or man. Dear memory of myself, wanting to climb, wanting to know, to be taught what is there. Each time I am reinvented as another human, too many times to see the way gold and green are not the lights meant to grow here in Arabia, far from home, in a Spain lost to Inquisition, swept away that golden Jewish and Muslim age in wind and sun. All its C words, blue and mispronounced, from books that did not belong, were miswritten. The mosque roofs grow moss. Rain shines down through the late May storm clouds, and what a lonely span of ocean I crossed, having renounced my family of questionable faith on that middle island to come here to the valley of the Kumeyaay on a shore that we will oddly call Khalifa, to obey the dismembered God, who in pastures of invasive plants summons me once more to storm heaven.
this okay? Can you hear me okay with the mask on? Perfect, okay. Thank you. Thank you for that introduction, Parker. Kazim, thank you so much for that reading. Thank you for your words, your poems, and your words of peace to begin your set. Thank you so much. Thank you all for being here. Thank you to my family who came out and former students who I miss and new friends who I'll get to know. Thank you for being here. To some poems. So Parker gave a really great introduction, so we all then know what the Ferguson Report is and what an erasure is, so I can just get right to it, yeah? Okay. All right. This is maybe my 4th time reading from this book, so I ask that you bear with me. Last time I read it took me maybe a little less than 10 minutes to read a book I took more than 6 years to write. Yeah. All right. Horses, hundreds, neighing. Part reflex, part reason, part particular urge. At gunpoint among them, you are. Less likely to live into the wild go the captive born. Home in the high grass, a barking dog chokes itself against the pull of a tight leash, its neck extending farther than cries for help. A kind of headlight echoing, increasing in reach. The forecast red, the city red, diminishing to the proportion of. Whoever said death comes in threes is an optimist. Then the birds began to fly, low and patternless, as if they were each 2 hands joined, just pretending at birds. The soft music from passing cars shouting down the soft music of their dying. Stop, hands where I can see. A boy pretends to pray. His mark makes of her hands a bird and flies away. Stop, or I'll shoot, he kids. Then makes of his hands a gun, fires away. In the bushes, next to the lot, across the street, a rustling like back talk, a deer. The animal out of nowhere flees, seconds too late. A design oversight assigned to that particular beast. On the police radio, a song, a threat, a slip of tongue in an ear, moist as an eye. Approached, the deer stiffens, a telltale sign the conditions under which it ran were breaking the skin. Worse, training the mind. Who among us is stunned by how fast rain pours from the sky? Stunned by how the sky, clear at first, self-corrects, as if to say, I mean this, not that. That, not this. Use of force, force of habit, of nature, force feed, force down, force his hand, force in line, full force, by force, show of force, brute force, blunt force to be reckoned with, force a smile as law enforcement turns out, in force, to force, open your door. With the living, I am familiar. A woman stretches the truth to disappear it, throws her voice to animate it. As when I imagine the word was made flesh. I've been trying to scrape up what I remember. 1,100 stems, long, headless. 2, a few bad apples. 3, reports of a stolen pickup. You put down one color, Bearden thought, and it calls for an answer. What's an answer to black, I wonder? As for men lying face down in the street, knees on their necks, their hands behind their backs, laboring like babies on their bellies, trying to crawl. Then stiff as a dime down after a toss in the air, tails, sea heads, heads, execution on the basis of fact, including the fact, if true, with the caption, pass out, motherfucker. An idea came to me this morning, like an honest mistake. It's sundown here, the day almost entirely extinguished, closes its casket's crown after bearing gifts as pointed as its teeth. They say, stand in line, so we stand in line. As the line advances, they say, stand still. Around us, everything going like cars or clouds. Us, the blur cars pass. The blue clouds dam. They say wait, so we wait. As if for some fragrant flower that unfurls one night a year. They say shh. So like trees, we mouth cross sounds of flags beaten to shreds by wind. Our heads twitch, birds watching for what might be stalking. Right before they deploy canines to bite. There's a pause between wails in which you hear your shut eyes dilate. Listen. Attention, history, temperamental as it's sold, wishes to remain anonymous in nature, name, and potential consequence. Ensuring a number of revisions, alternate endings, exact dates as appropriate. At the window, a figure, separate his offenses, motions for me to get closer. With an ear to the glass, I remain silent. Anything you say can and will be. Okay, so that's that. I'm going to read a little bit from my first book, Ordinary Beast. I think I have time, yeah? Yeah, okay. Yay, okay. So I'll read a bit from this. Have to read always first the poem from my mom. Bring her in the room. This is called The First Person Who Will Live to Be 150 Years Old Has Already Been Born, from my mom. Scientists say the average human life gets 3 months longer every year. By this math, death will be optional, like a tie, or dessert, or suffering. My mother asks whether I'd want to live forever. I'd get bored, I tell her. But she says there's so much to do, meaning she believes there's much she hasn't done. 30 years ago, she was the age I am now, but unlike me, too industrious to think about birds disappeared by rain. If only we had more time or enough money to be kept on ice until such a time science could bring us back. Of late, my mother has begun to think life short-lived. I'm too young to convince her otherwise. The one and only occasion I was in the same room as the Mona Lisa, it was encased in glass behind what I imagine were velvet ropes. There's far less between ourselves and oblivion. Skin that often defeats its very purpose. Or maybe its purpose isn't protection at all, but rather to provide a place similar to a doctor's waiting room in which to sit until our names are called. Hold your questions until the end. Mother, measure my wide open arms. We still have this much time to kill. Okay, how y'all doing? Y'all good? Okay, good. Y'all need to stand up, stretch, you good? Do what you gotta do. All right, this is a tiny poem. It's called Hysterical Strength. When I hear news of a hitchhiker struck by lightning yet living, or a child lifting a 2-ton sedan to free his father pinned underneath, or a camper fighting off a grizzly with her bare hands until someone, a hunter perhaps, can shoot it dead, my thoughts turn to Black people, the hysterical strength we must possess to survive our very existence, which I fear many believe is and treat as itself a freak occurrence. Okay, this next poem needs a bit of an introduction. It's called Candelabra with Heads, and it's after Thomas Hirshhorn's Candelabra with Heads, which is a work of art. It's mannequins, a bunch of mannequins wrapped in brown duct tape and lifted up on a wooden structure. So I wrote this poem inspired by that work of art. And the form this poem takes is the second half is the reverse of the first half, and then there's a thesis-like statement at the poem's end. Candelabra with Heads. Had I not brought with me my mind, as it has been made, this thing, this brood of mannequins cocooned and mounted on a wooden scaffold, might be 8 infants swaddled and sleeping, might be 8 fleshy fingers on one hand, might be a family tree with 8 pictured frames. Such treaties occur in the brain. Can you see them hanging? Their shadow is a crowd stripping the tree of souvenirs. Skin shrinks and splits. The bodies weep fat, the color of yolk. Can you smell them burning? Their perfume climbing as wisteria would a trellis. As wisteria would a trellis burning. Their perfume climbing, fat the color of yolk. Can you smell them? Skin shrinks and splits. The bodies weep. Is a crowd stripping the tree of souvenirs? Can you see them hanging? Their shadow frames. Such treaties occur in the brain. Might be a family tree with 8 pictured. Might be 8 fleshy fingers on one hand. Might be 8 infants swaddled and sleeping and mounted on a wooden scaffold. This brood of mannequins, cocooned as it has been made, this thing. Had I not brought with me my mind? Who can see this and not see lynchings? Okay. This next poem is inspired by the one I just read. At the advice of editors and poets who I admire, I extracted the last line, "Who can see this and not see lynchings," from my chapbook. But it was missing something, and for my full length, I really thought that the poem required that last line for it to work, at least for me. So with my full length, I decided to return it to its rightful place. And so this poem describes my impulse to do that. This is called "In Defense of Candelabra with Heads." And the phrase "the animal" in the poem refers to my chapbook, the animal after whom other animals are named. And what else do you need to know? I think that's it. In defense of candelabra with heads. If you've read the candelabra with heads that appears in this collection and the one in the animal, thank you. The original, the one included here, is an example, I'm told, of a poem that can speak for itself but loses faith in its ability to do so by ending with a thesis question. Yeats said a poem should click shut like a well-made box. I don't disagree. I ask who can see this and not see lynchings, not because I don't trust you, dear reader, or my own abilities. I ask because the imagination would have us believe, much like faith, the original candelabra lacks in things unseen. You should know that human limbs burn like branches and branches like human limbs. Only after man began hanging man from trees, then setting him on fire, which would jump from limb to branch like a bastard species of bird, did we come to know such things. 100 years from now, October 9, 2116, 8:18 p.m., when all but the lucky are good and dead, may someone happen upon the question in question. May that lucky someone be black and so far removed from the verb lynch that she be dumbfounded by its meaning. May she then call up Hirshhorn's candelabra with heads. May her imagination, not her memory, run wild. I think I have time for one more. Okay. I'm going to end with a poem from my husband, which I always do. It's called Object Permanence, and it's for John. Not John Street, but John. We wake as if surprised the other is still there, each petting the sheet to be sure. How have we managed our way to this bed, beholden to heat like dawn indebted to light? Though we're not so self-important as to think everything has led to this, everything has led to this. There's a name for the animal love makes of us, named, I think, like rain for the sound it makes. You are the animal after whom other animals are named. Until there's none left to laugh, days will start with the same startle and end with caterpillars gorged on milkweed. Oh, how we entertain the angels with our brief animation. Oh, how I'll miss you when we're dead. Thank you so much.